Without the help of architects or engineers, Kiefer and his assistants have turned this 200-acre site into one of the most dazzling, jaw-dropping works of art in the world. Here he expanded into sculpture and installation. He began to create a world for himself.
For my entire youth, all I wanted was to paint. And I learned a lot from painters. And it was only through a crash course of the history of cinema at the Cinematheque in Paris, while I tried to become a painter, that I got detoured and realized movies was a sort of painting, but with cameras and with different methods. And a lot of the painters I admired had started making movies at the time, Warhol more than anybody else, and Brakhage and Michael Snow. So I thought that made a lot of sense. But I kept the painterly heart I had and the understanding of framing for me, even when I later on became a photographer and as a film director. So you do learn a lot from painting about how to balance a shot, and especially where to put the horizon and how to frame a person in a shot. Landscape, for instance, I wouldn't know how to paint without having learned so much from Dutch painters. So it stuck with me, and I'm happy that I have that knowledge from painting and not a similar knowledge from filmmaking, because it gives you a certain freedom towards cinema if you've learned your stuff somewhere else. I shudder when I remember how we shot Pina, and that the rig was such a heavy, clunky thing that it could only be moved by a huge crane, and that we had to empty half the auditorium to fit that crane in there, because it was the only piece of equipment that could carry these two giant cameras and the rig and the mirror and everything. So 12 years later, shooting Anselm, we had marvelous equipment. The Sony Venice allowed us to just take the lens and the capturing system off, and the whole body of the camera was not on the cameraman's shoulder, but somebody else carried it. And Franz could really, if he wanted to shoot with an easy rig, just handheld, move it very freely and very fast. And the scenes when we went with Anselm into his studio, when he's painting or when he's working with fire on his painting or with lead, in the studio we always shot handheld, so to be very flexible and to have the smallest possible crew, because Anselm really didn't want to be observed by many people. He said, if you and Franz are behind me, that's fine, but don't stand there with 20 people. So, and we were two. It was a very tiny unit, thanks to the technology that we could use. It allowed us to be very flexible and do things that I could not even have dreamt of at the time with Pina. We shot with all possible means this time. We used telescopic cranes, sometimes to get high up into these enormous spaces where he's working, to get a feeling of the immensity of his studios. We shot a lot of tracks, everything known to man to move the camera. Among others, Franz himself. He's very good with the easy rig, and he does move. He's very much at ease with it, and he's a master in that technology. So it is almost as good as a Steadicam, but it's so much faster. When I explained to my stereographer that I felt we did need a drone for Barjac, especially in Barjac, for that landscape and this enormous I don't even know how to call it, this art landscape with these 30 buildings and the crooked towers that Anselm built and all of that. I felt in order to see the entirety of it, we needed to be up in the air. So I said, is there any drone that can do 3D properly? And there wasn't. I didn't just want to put two tiny little cameras on it. So we built our own drone for and developed our own drone we used it also finally in the Odenwald to capture the snowy landscape where in this remote forest where Anselm worked for the first 10 years of his life. It was a pretty heavy-duty drone, and we built 2 cameras that we could still move closer and further away, and they were able to really move like a normal rig. They weren't just steady. So they allowed us to shoot the wide shots quite competently with a camera distance of up to 20 centimeters for the really wide shots, or 15. It gave up on us each time we shot for five minutes with the bloody drone. It collapsed. But each time we just got enough. Each time we just get the 20 seconds that we wanted. Very late in the shoot, I shot 7 times. Altogether, we shot. Over 2.5 years, we used 7 shooting periods of each time a week, 10 days. In the beginning, we were much more documentary shoot, conventional documentary shoot. And then I slowly realized I needed different elements in order to really approach the work and to give it a more complex vision. So I did finally want to also include Anselm when he worked as an unknown painter, when nobody from the art world or museum world or no art historian or gallerist ever saw him. And when he developed over 10 years really the whole language of his art. So I wanted to shoot some of that. So I needed an actor for that. And because the only actor who was informed enough, the only person who was informed enough and was a witness to that period in Anselm's life was his own son. He was little and he played under the canvases and under the easel, and he was on the back of his bike when Anselm drove around taking photographs. And most of his art is photography based in the beginning. So I shot that with Daniel and his own son. He was a little scared. He wanted absolutely to have his father's approval that he could do this. And I had to really forbid that to him because Anselm and I had a deal, and the deal was that I would surprise him. Don't tell me what you're doing, Wim. Just do everything, and I make everything possible, but never give me a concept. Don't let me read. I don't want to come to the editing room. Just please promise me that you'll surprise me. So when his son wanted to call his dad, would you agree that I play you when you're 40? And I told him, no, you're not going to call him because you're going to ruin the whole surprise. So and then he understood, and he did it, but he was very, very scared of the moment that his father would then see him. And then even later, we also went into Anselm's childhood. And because Anselm was raised in the south of Germany, I figured I needed a kid with that accent. Anselm still has that southern accent, even today, even in all his interviews. So I went down there and had a casting, wasted days and days, and never found a kid who I thought was bright enough and had the eyes and the intelligence and the curiosity to play that future painter. And Anselm must have been a very, very bright kid, because I know all his drawings and paintings from his childhood. He was extremely gifted. So I couldn't find it, and I almost gave up on it when I realized I had the right kid in the family. And there was my grandnephew, little Anton, who didn't want to be a painter. He wanted to be a scientist, but he could explain the whole world to me. And I realized that was the spirit. And he then became young Anselm at the age of 8 and did a fabulous job. And when finally the two met, the real Anselm and his 8-year-old kid, they got along so well. They became the best of friends. And actually the most beautiful shot for me of the entire film is when Anselm then took his own self, the little boy that he once was, on his shoulders. Because for me, Anselm, one of the secrets of his creativity and this incredible outburst of work, I mean, how can a single man produce so much? For me, the secret to that has always been that I was sure that he kept the child that he once was alive in him, and that he was still had access to the child he once was. And